So following the recent news of a Ben Solo movie being in the works, and this is coming from the actor Adam Driver himself, I wanted to cover the possible interesting avenues that this movie could take from the plot or story standpoint. So one of the interesting reasons why I think this could work is that I think the title really hits the nail on the head. I think Ben Solo being on the run is an excellent idea because it really shows what would happen following Ben's turn back to the light side. I think even though this was the right choice for his character, it would still show a lot of the repercussions for his previous actions as Kylo Ren. And this would be from a lot of the remaining Resistance members still wanting him to be in prison. And in addition to that, there likely would be a lot of bounty hunters after him, so he would really have to live his life on the run. And I think this would really be a great way to separate this storyline from the original trilogy, because looking back to Return of the Jedi, you also have Darth Vader turning back to the light to defeat Palpatine and to be redeemed by his son just before he passed. So you already had the storyline of Vader sacrificing himself, and I think you have a pretty similar arc for Kylo Ren in the Rise of Skywalker movie. However, I think the great way to deviate from that is now seeing the other half of that if he was still to survive somehow, since he was a lot younger than Vader. I think showing the aftermath of that is really where the sequel characters could continue to grow, and really seeing Ben Solo still struggling to stay alive by living his life on the run, but still trying to be a much better person than he was before, I think is an excellent arc for a standalone movie here. Another reason why I think this would be really interesting is that this would be a great opportunity to show off Ben Solo's piloting skills. We do know that he is the son of Han Solo and the grandson of Anakin Skywalker, both being great pilots. And even though you did see some of him in the cockpit in the sequel trilogy, I think really a whole movie where he's really getting tracked down by a lot of different characters or bounty hunters or resistance X-Wings. I think having the majority of that be him in some sort of a ship, really seeing that in terms of him constantly having to fly across the galaxy just to stay afloat, I think would be an excellent choice here. And I think it could really mirror some of the neat aesthetics and tones of The Mandalorian, where you have about a 50-50 between him being this lone ranger who's having to go about his life, but you also see a lot of that through the lens of the Razor Crest. I think that for Ben Solo could be a really neat dynamic here. And a third reason, I think, really looking at the full arc of his character is now he would actually have a real reason to wear a mask. Before, it was really more of a nod to Vader, just to kind of mimic him in a lot of ways. But unlike Vader, he didn't really have any practical reason for wearing the mask. He wasn't really injured at all. And you had his character going back and forth between wearing the mask and not wearing the mask. But now I think if he got a little bit more of a neutral mask that wasn't necessarily so evil or Vader-esque, I think this would be a lot more interesting, because now he's having to hide his identity from society or whatever new life he's starting to begin, because you do have the majority of the plot being focused on him living on the run. So I think that would really add a neat conflict for his character until he's really able to find a more stable environment to live in. I think this could be a great option for that. A fourth option here, I think it would be really neat to see Ben Solo make a new lightsaber, and I think in comparison to Rey, I much rather would have Ben Solo, after turning back from the dark side, now wield a yellow lightsaber. You could maybe continue with the crossguard. I think that's a neat option for Ben Solo, and I think yellow is a much better fit for him, and I think he fits much more of the gray Jedi type as opposed to Rey. I really don't see any reason for Rey to wield a yellow lightsaber. I think she's totally fine with blue. I think she could have still made the same new hilt in terms of her character arc at the end of Rise of Skywalker. But I think there's really no reason to give Rey yellow. Maybe it's just based off of her newfound identity in terms of being a descendant of Palpatine, but just in terms of her personality, I really don't see her being in the middle by any means. I think Ben Solo would be a much better fit for that here, and I think a new lightsaber along with his new identity could really be a neat detail to really mirror what his character is going through in this. And a fifth option, I think this would also touch on some of the issues in terms of the sequel trilogy's delivery, is that we could learn a lot more about Ben Solo's past. Maybe this was when he was younger and growing up, or even some of his earlier days as Kylo Ren. I think a lot of those questions didn't get answered properly in the sequels, and now whether through flashbacks or different mentionings of this in the present, we could learn a lot more about what had happened. Maybe this is adding more detail to the Knights of Ren, or what really added to his turn to the dark side before, in addition to the information we got. Or it could show some of his earlier days with Snoke and how Snoke was really able to turn him over to the dark side. Or even if it was just a quick glimpse of his childhood in terms of him in the Millennium Falcon with his parents or with Luke, I think that could all be great. A sixth option here, and I think this is a really strong option for his character and the future of Star Wars as well, is that Ben Solo still being alive would really provide an opportunity for him to have kids and really to be redeemed by his kids, but in a much different way than what happens to Vader in terms of him actually living through it. And I think Ben Solo having kids could really be a great foundation to really continue the Star Wars storyline even beyond this movie or the sequels. And I think if Ben Solo were to have kids following this movie, I think it would be really neat to see him as a father, and he tries to instill a lot of the principles that he lost in his own personal journey, and to really make sure that what happened to him doesn't happen to his kids. And I think there's a lot of EU material for what you could base Ben Solo's kids off of. But looking at a seventh option here, I think another neat option for Ben Solo is that he could really be the one to defeat a new villain if a new evil were to emerge in a new movie here. And I think this is really because Ben Solo is the most powerful Force user that's left. Rey has had a lot of experience, but she just doesn't really have the background knowledge or training that Ben Solo does. So I think if someone powerful were to emerge, I think Ben Solo as more of a mysterious gray Jedi-like figure, being the one to stop any emerging threats before they grow any stronger, could be a really strong storyline. And this would allow enough opportunity for Rey and other light side users to really grow to where Ben Solo's not needed anymore. But I think in the meantime, if this was maybe a few years after the Rise of Skywalker, I still would see Ben Solo being the most capable character left to really be the one to ward off any new potential threats. But in addition to that, I think an eighth reason why this could be interesting is that it would add a really interesting conflict for Rey, because she really would be at a crossroads in terms of where her stance is on Ben Solo, even if they weren't necessarily together or even talking in this movie at all. I think even just in terms of how her character would have to proceed if she is being the one to lead the resistance and is one of the big leaders along with Poe and Finn, I think she likely would be reluctant to really hunt after Ben Solo given what happened between them in the last movie. And I think this could really be a huge issue for Rey, because on one end she does have to be in agreement with the other resistance members who would still want justice for what Kylo Ren did before. But if she really was also just trying to voice her concerns in terms of being reluctant here, I think that could really question her ability to lead the resistance following the sequel trilogy. So I think this would add a lot of great conflict for her character. And on a similar note to the eighth point here, I think this could really set up a great option for this movie, is that potentially Rey leaves the resistance or just isn't able to find her footing in there, and maybe is really more curious about continuing her training in the Force, and she just doesn't have any of those resources now to do that. And I think a great option for her to do that would be someone like Ben Solo, if they were able to go to a discrete location, almost what you would have had between Luke and and Rey, had they really trained on the isolated planet where she finds Luke in The Last Jedi. And I think really out of anyone, Ben Solo would be the only one to have the ability to train her. I think we saw in episode 9 when Ben Solo was at his full health that he was able to defeat her pretty strongly. So he would have the knowledge and power to really shape her in her lightsaber or force abilities. And I think if this was done without anyone knowing, this could really allow Rey's character the ability to grow if she was able to get trained by Ben Solo before going back and starting her Jedi Order. And this, of course, could all be done in secret. And I think it would be a really neat tie-in to the proposal that Kylo Ren had given to her in The Force Awakens, but now he could be a teacher in terms of a much more balanced view on the Force, and obviously wanting to do good now. I think this could be his way of also redeeming himself in a way, even though he would still have to live in private or on the run. I think him trying to really teach Rey for the better could be a great arc for his character as well as hers. And the last reason here, I think Adam Driver's acting was really one of the strong suits of the sequel trilogy, so there's really just no reason to turn him down. I think you should continue with his character. And I think his character would be really interesting to follow as more of an anti-hero protagonist in a new movie here, and I think this could be a great way to start a new trilogy. And this really would be the framework for starting a new trilogy, as you could have the first movie really follow him. And if you are going the route where he is training Rey, I think that could set up a second movie in the trilogy here that could really focus more on Rey and starting a new Jedi Order. And I think having a Ben Solo movie first that would establish this would make a lot more sense than just jumping to Rey starting her own Jedi Order with not really having enough of an expertise herself in terms of what she's doing. But of course you could get that in the second movie and even the third, and then Ben Solo could become a little bit more of a background character for the rest of the story. But I really think that centering it around him could be an interesting angle for a new set of movies here for the Star Wars timeline. But feel free to let me know any of your thoughts on this, and I'll see you later.